Hey there kids, it's not your dad but your LoreDad, here to share with you how I make alternate history. This is a video that I've been wanting to do for a long time, but I didn't want to do it until I had proven myself. Now that I have 6,000 subscribers, consider this my 6,000 subscriber special. And of course, thank you to everyone for subscribing. I found it very hard to make this video due to the sheer amount of information that I want to say, while also attempting to make the video concise and informative. So instead of talking about everything, for this video I'll focus on how to start making alternate history. When you think of alternate history, the most common premises are ideas that are usually the following. What if Germany won World War I? What if the Axis won World War II? What if the South won the Civil War? And what if the Roman Empire lived on? The first major pitfall that people, myself included, fall for is that they think that the premise is the point of divergence. This is not the case. For example, let's do a quick Central Powers win World War I scenario. Okay, how do they win? Well, let's say that the Germans don't instigate conflict with the USA. Why? Oh, well, they don't do unrestricted submarine warfare. Why? Well, they just don't. In this case, the point of divergence simply is, the Germans don't do this thing that I think would have prevented them from losing World War I, and I don't really consider this to be a good point of divergence. For one, you're taking the German high command of our history and universally applying a "don't sink convoys" idea in their head. Every action they had taken prior to that point is magically removed solely for the sake of protecting Germany from losing World War I. Bad points of divergence create plot armor and don't make for engaging stories. Secondly, the point of divergence that you made may not actually give you the result that you want. Germany not pursuing unrestricted submarine warfare would lead to the Entente's supply lines to be far more functional due to lack of effective submarine warfare. Sure, the USA might not have joined the war, but would Germany actually win if the Americans hadn't showed up? Some people may realize this is a problem, and then add a second point of divergence in order to make the scenario more realistic. But this is another pitfall. You have now exponentially increased the amount of work that you need to do to justify the scenario. An example of this happening was when I was working on Aftershocks of the Revolutions 1, the first one. We had the premise, what if the 1848 revolutions happened differently? And it became to be interpreted by developers as every revolution past 1848 happens differently. This open-ended approach led to each regional developer to have incredible creative freedom, which made for interesting scenarios. But it had the adverse effect of making the lore incomprehensible and incoherent. Each region's lore contradicted each other's, and it made it impossible to answer historical questions, and essentially became, this thing happens because it's cool. If you want to learn more about what we learned from Aftershocks of the Revolutions 1 going into Aftershocks of the Revolutions 2, check out the Walking with LoreDad podcast on my second channel, No Lore. I interview my friend Jubs, founder of Aftershocks 1 and co-lead of Aftershocks 2. We talk about how to organize an alternate history mod and other things to keep in mind. I really recommend it. It was really fun to do. We've discussed why working backwards can lead to multiple points of divergence and why that's bad. But what are you supposed to do instead? Instead of working backwards, we move forwards. We establish a point of divergence first and then work from there. But there immediately becomes a problem. In the case of this Central Powers winning World War I scenario we're trying to make, we cannot move forward simply from the premise. We have to work backwards to find a specific event to change history to suit the scenario that we're trying to build. It seems contradictory to my previous statement of not working backwards, but there's a nuance to this approach that should be noted. Instead of resolving problems with one or many points of divergence and skipping to the end result, we are instead trying to find one point of divergence that would lead to the outcome we want to see. Let's use this Germany wins World War I premise as a baseline. We want Germany to win World War I, but how do we do that? Here's my process applied to this scenario. Take a step back and ask the question, what if the Germans won in the Battle of Verdun? Take a serious hard look at all the conditions leading to that point. If that point of divergence did not reach the outcome we were hoping for, we take another step back. Keep doing this until you find a chain of events that leads to the main element of the scenario that you want to pursue. Now, to be frank, this is a lot of work, especially for more outlandish scenarios. However, there is a major benefit to this approach. For one, you're actually making alternate history. You've established a single point of divergence and continued a theoretical line of events resulting from this alternate event and created a timeline. Congratulations! But the secondary benefit is that you've established a baseline for the rest of your world, and if you do it properly, every single subsequent question regarding your world can be answered by the point of divergence that you've established. An example of this working well is Project Stresa. This timeline started with me trying to get a reason for the Stresa front to form and stay united, hence the name. I figured that the annexation of Austria following World War I would have led to a containment policy against Germany in France, Italy, and Britain. However, after I started following the exact line of what if Austria united with Germany in 1919, it quickly became something else. The Austrians would be supported by Italy while France supported the Rhinish. The two would begin to be geopolitically aligned. The Stavinsky affair, which I learned about during my research, would be a great opportunity for the far right in France to take charge. 2 out of the 3 nations in the Stresa front were now fascist, but Britain wouldn't want to align with them and gain sympathy for Germany. Appeasement continues, with events inspired by real history and eventually leads to a Second World War. And all the decisions I made in this alternate history scenario and its plot can be boiled down to this happened because that happened because Austria united with Germany in 1919. Now, that's a good example of how working forwards works. But don't just take my word for it. We can look to other popular scenarios for example of how this approach works. What better of a comparison to our exercise than Kaiserreich? Kaiserreich, the mod that inspired everyone to ask the question, what if insert country won World War I, and turn it into a Hearts of Iron 4 mod. Everyone looks to this mod as the quintessential Central Powers victory scenario. But what if I told you that this scenario started as a how do we get Kerensky in charge of Russia? Yep, you heard that right. The initial theorization of Kaiserreich's lore was simply a thought experiment to get Kerensky in charge of Russia. They justified this by having the whites win the Civil War through Germany's support because the Kaiser stayed in power because the USA didn't join the war. So the cordon sanitaire and buffer states led to direct connections with Germany, and therefore no Soviet Union. However, due to the lack of success of Leninism in the East, it leads to syndicalism, a left-wing movement in Western Europe, to become more prominent, leading to revolts in the defeated powers of Britain, France, and Italy. The premise of the mod is simply, what if Germany won World War I? But the point of divergence is, Germany wins World War I because the USA doesn't get involved due to limited submarine warfare, and that was the single point of divergence. But the initial question that got them to Germany wins World War I is, how do we get Kerensky in charge? So they asked the question, they took steps back until they got exactly what they needed to, and it developed into something else, and it's a complete world because of it. Now, you may have noticed, Kaiserreich's point of divergence of German submarine warfare not engaging the USA into the Great War is the exact point of divergence that I claimed is not particularly plausible when I first started this video. What gives? Does that mean that I think Kaiserreich is a bad scenario? In order to answer that, we need to take a deeper dive into what alternate history is, and why I believe plausibility trumps realism. Usually, people think that history is what really happened, but it is far more nuanced than that. History is our best guess of what happened given the documentation of several people with their own biases and attempting to structure a narrative that is digestible for people to understand. This is an incredibly nuanced topic that I want to talk more about, but for the sake of keeping things simple, let's just say history is 100% real. If you take a historical event and make it happen differently than in our timeline, it's fictional. Now it is not real. Therefore, you should not be pursuing realism when making an alternate timeline. Instead, you should be striving for plausibility. Plausibility means that the theory that you're proposing, for example, if Germany didn't sink an American shipping vessel, America would not have joined the First World War, and because of that, Germany would have won World War I, is plausible. You can attack this theory with contradicting information or an opposing theory. For example, if Germany restricted their submarine warfare, the Entente would be stronger, and therefore they would still lose. And this alternate theory, counter to your initial theory, may make it more realistic, but if you continuously attempt to rectify your point of divergence or theory to become more realistic, you'll eventually end up with the exact history of our timeline, and therefore not create alternate history. Therefore, when creating alternate history, the point of divergence has to be unrealistic. What makes good alternate history is making a plausible outcome following the point of divergence. Your what if Germany won World War I will end up different than someone else's scenario with the exact same premise. Maybe you get some historical facts wrong. Maybe it ends up being that your initial assumption is just not plausible. Maybe you need to abandon your existing theory and return to the drawing board. But at the end of the day, you've learned something. As long as you properly respond to feedback for your scenarios, you will get more and more plausible until you make good alternate history. My initial ideas and scenarios were terrible. I'm only showing you the best of what I've cooked over the years. In the past, I made all these mistakes as well. After studying other alternate history channels and practice, I was able to get to a point where I've made 2 long-form series that I'm proud of, and I'm currently in the process of outlining my 3rd. Don't be afraid to start. Don't be afraid to fail. Even if what you make is artificial history, it's a start. Don't be discouraged and never give up. Come to my Discord and share with my community what you have cooking. Even if it's incredibly similar to what someone else has made, even if it's implausible. I hope that my community will be able to give you feedback following my guidelines and help you make good alternate history. Thanks to everybody for listening to this video. Really passionate about this topic, actually. I didn't expect me to be so invigorated by this. If you want to have more video essays type videos, let me know. I'm really interested in pursuing different kinds of content on my channel. Shout out to Enzo Rafael Souza Silva, Louis Avant, Good, Kaiser Gaming, Drubs, and Solo Leo for being channel members. Thank you so much for your support. If you want to have your name shouted out at the end of my video, please consider supporting the channel by getting a membership. I usually give some fatherly advice at the end of my video, but I don't think that I should this time. Just go back to when I told you to never give up, and there you go. I hope you have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Please subscribe. Have a good day. Bye-bye.